Welcome to a Prevent Connect podcast, where we explore the prevention of violence against women. This is a project of the California Coalition Against Sexual Assault.
So, good almost afternoon, everybody. We are at the final session of NSAC, yay! So, hands over your heads. This is a way to clap and indicate for folks who are both hard of hearing, so if they can't hear you, they can visually see. This would be in ASL, but if we're clapping, we can do it over our heads, and that indicates for folks that that's what we're doing. So yay, I'm really excited to be part of the final session here at NSAC. We're going to be talking about the universe model of gender and using that and applying it in prevention. So my name is Liat Wexler. I work for Center for Community Solutions. We're located in San Diego, California. And we are a dual service agency. We have all types of services. Feel free to come up and ask me about our agency afterwards. I do have a history of being involved with the network La Red, for anyone who's familiar with the network, in Massachusetts. Yay! And so my background and where I came up in this field was actually working with the LGBTIQ communities, polyamorous communities, and kinky BDSM communities. So for me, I have brought that into everything I do, and some of that will be affecting what we talk about today. So how many of you, just by clapping over your head, how many of you have taken a track here at NSAC, a workshop, or have previous information and knowledge about LGBTIQ communities with respect to sexual assault? Most of you. Okay, that's awesome. So that means that we can blow through some of the 101 stuff, or we can talk about it in a much more modeling way in terms of how you would teach it to others. I'm very excited about that. So a few learning objectives that we're going to focus on today, and I hope you can keep me to these. We're going to define some key terminology that's used specifically in trans and non-binary communities. Many of you may know this terminology, so I'm not going to actually spend a whole lot of time with definitions. There's a lot of places to go with that. I also really want to make a point that language is constantly changing. So this community in particular is a fast-moving one, and I spend a lot of time on Tumblr just trying to keep up. So that's what I encourage you all to do as well. So we're going to talk about the differences between gender identity, gender expression, sex, as well as orientation very briefly, although I think that you all know about this. And we're going to discuss gender identity using a non-linear model. And that I think is really key, and we'll talk about why it matters for prevention. And then we're going to learn, hopefully at least, 2 ways to adapt your own curricula. So how many of you actually brought curricula or a component of the work that you're doing with you today? Clap over your head if you did. A few people. Okay. So I was, no, yay, very good. So I was really hoping that folks would come prepared with some material to work with. Hopefully all of you are doing prevention of some sort or want to be, and so can be thinking about the types of activities and learning that you're doing with folks in the community as we have this conversation. So I just want to briefly start with why we care about this, and probably all of you are familiar with this data. This is coming from the CDC back in 2010, where we noticed that in straight folks, straight survivors, it's 29% of men are being sexually assaulted, stalked, or experiencing IPV during their lifetime, 35% for women who are straight. And then when we start looking at the gay and lesbian community, those numbers start to increase. So except for gay men, where it stays almost the same at 26%, but for lesbians, it's 44%. Then when we start talking about the bi community, the numbers skyrocket. And so for men who are bisexual, we're talking 37%, and for bi women, it's 61%. So this is only talking about orientation. The CDC did not look at gender identity and the trans community, and that's really important because I'm hoping that they will shift that in this next coming round of research. when we look, there are some other sources of information for the trans community, and I'm going to highlight a couple of them. But the first one is the most recent, the campus sexual assault survey that some of you may be familiar with. Really great. If you're a data nerd, go take a look at the actual survey material. It is fantastic. The tool that they used is really interesting, and the way they were asking their questions was on point. So totally valuable if you're into research, into data. So when we look at women in the campus setting, the percent of students, it's 33.1% of women who are students who are experiencing non-consensual sexual contact. And that can include, by a whole bunch of different means. It's penetration and touching via force or threat of force, incapacitation, for example, intoxication, absence of affirmative consent, as well as coercion. So all of these things were being looked at in this study. The piece that I really want to highlight, and I think that is getting missed a lot in our conversations, is that number jumps for trans students. This is one of the first surveys to actually ask about gender identity, and we're seeing that 39% of transgender students are experiencing non-consensual sexual contact. The number is much higher than it is for women. I would also add that the number is higher in large proportion for folks of color. And without that intersection, we are missing the point, right? So these things matter. One of the things that I want to point out with this is that the survey specifically asked about transgender identity, but also gender nonconforming, gender queer. They offered the option to say you're questioning your gender, as well as I'm a gender that's not listed on this survey. And then finally, there was a decline to answer component to that question. So the decline to answer was not included in that number, but all the others were wrapped together for this. Okay. And then there's another survey that some may be familiar with, Injustice at Every Turn. It was done some years ago now, and it surveyed over 6,000 trans people. It was trans specific. And they were looking at a broad range of things. They weren't focusing on sexual assault, but they did ask some questions about sexual assault in the various parts of the survey. And some of the data that's coming out is important to just acknowledge. In terms of folks who were being sexually assaulted, all of this was due to their trans status. So that's really important to understand. When people were asked, they were asked, what, how many of these things have happened to you because you're trans, not just have happened to you. And so 12% of K-12 transgender students say that they've been sexually assaulted because they're trans. Not just sexually assaulted. For folks who were sexually assaulted at work, it's about 6%. If you're an undocumented non-citizen in this country and you're transgender, 19% of you are going to be sexually assaulted at work because of your trans status. 22%, this is really relevant for our field, 22% of trans folks are being sexually assaulted in shelters. 2% are being sexually assaulted by police. And so when we talk about what our movement is doing and the way we relate to police and the work we're doing hand in hand with police in efforts to serve survivors, we need to be thinking about all those intersections. I know there have been some great sessions here that I've attended about how communities of color relate to police, and I think that may be present on folks' mind right now. And it matters a lot for the LGBTIQ communities and specifically for the trans communities. I have a friend back in San Diego. She's a black trans woman. She's a professional, and she was wearing her business wear, headed to her car to go to work, and the police stopped her and asked her about being a sex worker. So this is the kind of thing that black trans women specifically are experiencing at really, really high rates. And finally, in jails, in prisons, we're looking at 15% of folks being sexually assaulted because of their trans status in all of these cases. So that's why we should care. This is affecting this community at much higher proportions, and we're not talking about it in ways that are really constructive when we're thinking about prevention. We may be looking at this from an intervention standpoint, but I want us to be kind of thinking about how do we impact these communities ahead of time? How do we impact all of our communities to be thinking about broad understanding of gender so that we can affect the social norms. So that's ultimately what we're going to talk about today. So I'm going to model very quickly a session that I do all the time. I do it dozens of times throughout the year. I do it with all of our staff and volunteers when I do our 101 during our crisis intervention training. So I talk about gender identity, and I use a strategy. So I'm inviting and encouraging folks to take part or all of what you hear today and apply it in the ways that make sense for you. I love when people take what I teach and adapt it. So please do. So we're going to make this interactive. That's how I always do it. So I need your participation for this. All right. So we're going to talk a little bit about. I'm not going to use the mic if folks can hear me in the back. Can you raise your hand if you can hear me in the back? Awesome. All right. So we're going to talk about all these different components, and let's start with these symbols. So can anybody tell me what gender that symbol is? What's the gender word for that? Male is the sex word for that. What is the gender word? Man. Very good. And what is the gender word for the other one? You like how I said other one? As if it's, other? Okay. Beautiful. All right. So this is an important distinction between sex and gender, and I use different words for it because if we don't, we start to mush everything together in ways that start to lose meaning. So the sex word, as folks said, is male, and the sex word here is female. I just want to point out, and this is my own personal pet peeve, that you will start to hear it now if you don't already. Culturally, a lot of people will say that man was talking to those females. Why do we do that? Why do we demote women and strip their humanity, right? Because we can use male and female as sex words for any biological thing. We can say, that tree is a male tree or that dog is a male dog, but we don't say that for men. However, we do say it for women. So culturally, we're stripping women of their humanity. So let's talk a little bit about the things that make up biological sex. See, I have this all on a PowerPoint too. So what are some of the components of biological sex? We talk about chromosomes, hormones, internal reproductive organs, and external genitalia, right? So let's do that for this. What are the expected chromosomes for a male? XY, good. And the expected chromosomes for females? XX, very good. All right, so that's what, see, I have it here. So those are the expected chromosomes. What about the expected dominant hormone? Testosterone over here, very good. And what's the dominant hormones over here? Estrogen and progesterone. Very good. Very good. So notice that as I'm doing this, I'm using the language of what are we expecting? And I think that that's an important component. I'm sort of modeling for you the way I teach it and a change in language, right? So it doesn't mean that these are always true. It just means that that's what we're culturally expecting to see out of male and female. And I specifically say male and female, not man and woman, right? These are two separate things. So let's talk about internal and external reproductive organs, right? So what are we expecting to see on males? Everybody, all at the same time, externally. Penis. Very good. All right. And what's another thing that we expect to see externally? Specifically? Scrotum. You didn't think you were going to be in 6th grade biology again, did you, today? All right. So then, in terms of females, what are we expecting to see externally? Vulva. So what is a vagina? Is it internal or external? It's internal. Okay, so let's go there. Beautiful. So vagina is an internal reproductive organ. What else is internal? Uterus. Good. And? Fallopian tubes. We can go on and on, can't we, right? clitoris is external, thank you. And it is considered part of the vulva. So vulva is sort of all of it on the outside, right? But it's very important, and let's not forget the clitoris. It is very important. So fallopian tubes. Absolutely. Right, I mean, we're talking about a penis. Why can't we talk about a clitoris, right? Absolutely. And so then internally, what are we expecting on males? Testes. Good. What else? Prostate. Very nice. There's a Cowper's gland. There's a, what's that? Vas deferens. Very good. So there's a lot more, okay? And it's important that we are mindful about the realities of bodies. And we can talk about body parts for what they are without assigning them particular gender, okay? So that's another component. Comprehensive sex education will do this. Most students are not getting comprehensive sex ed. Most of us probably did not get comprehensive sex ed, right? So let's now talk a little bit about gender roles and expression. Now, I made a choice. I could have picked a lot of figures to put up here, and I picked these two. So what's something that's glaringly obvious in common about these two figures? They both have heads. Thank you. I appreciate that. What else? They are white. They are white. That says something about the toys that we offer to children. It says something about our culture. It also says something about gender. So we cannot separate how we gender based on race. Those things are intimately connected. What it means to be a black man is different than what it means to be a white man. We assume different things. It's different than what we assume an Asian man is. And the same goes for women. So I point this out, and I use this model specifically for us to start thinking about those intersections and the ways in which we even begin to talk about and conceive of gender. So let's talk a little bit about some of the things that we see or that we know about that are stereotypically expected for men and for women in terms of gender roles and gender expression. So mannerisms, characteristics, voice pitch, appearance and grooming, chores, hobbies, jobs, all of it. So what do we expect to see for men? Aggressive, powerful, provider, I heard confident, I think. Strong, good. In terms of appearance, what are we expecting for men? Muscles. Tall, thank you. A deep voice. Short hair, thank you. Broad shoulders. And so some of these things are connected to secondary sex characteristics and to testosterone, and some of these things are connected merely to culture, right? What about for women? Let's really quickly talk about the stereotypes for women. Submissive, skinny, big boobs. Accommodating, thank you. Sexy, what does that mean? Big boobs. Back to the big boobs. Right. And what kind of jobs should women be holding? Secretary and mother, right? So nurturing, I heard. Absolutely. So gender roles and expression encompass all of those things. And those are the boxes that we're creating based on gender. The fact that we can still name these stereotypes means they still exist. Right? We have not gotten past them. They're still present. And they're present differently when we're talking about different race. So black women experience a different box than white women. Asian women experience a different box than black and white women. All of these things matter. If you are Latina, it is different than if you are white. So, and the same goes for men, right? So we really need to understand that when we create a box, the ones we just created are white. Okay? We cannot forget that. So let's talk a little bit about orientation. What are we expecting to see? So who are we expecting this guy to be attracted to? Her, most likely. Right? And who are we expecting her to be attracted to? Him. So that's what we mean when we talk about heteronormativity. It's the default assumption that people are hetero, and that's how we operate in the world. That as we look at someone, part of how we understand gender is that we are also expecting orientation to be straight. A real man is attracted to women. What does that say about gay men? First of all, they're not real men, right? And that they're less than, defective, maybe that they don't have some of the qualities that this person has, right? That this person should be strong, dominant, and then we might expect that gay men are not. And so if our expectation is different from what we're actually seeing, are we seeing the person in front of us? All right, so we've now created two boxes, the two boxes that exist that we culturally have in front of us. Of course, there's many more boxes based on race, based on class, based on ability, right? So someone who is a black woman who has a disability has a very different box. But in general, we can talk about these two boxes based on gender, okay? So let's start mixing the boxes up, right? There isn't just, two binary components. And so that's what I really want to get into. So of course, with orientation, very, very briefly, because I don't want to spend a lot of time on this, we've got gay, we've got bisexual, we've got lesbian, we've got dyke, we've got queer, we've got pansexual, we've got asexual, folks who have no attraction sexually to another. We have aromantic, people who don't want to have romantic relationships with others. We have many, many variations, demi, gray ace, go on and on and on, right? So if those terms are not familiar for you, please look them up, please do some research. I do not have time today to talk about those. So let's talk about how gender expression and gender roles are different based on time, based on, the particular culture that you're a part of. So Louis, I think 14th, don't quote me on this. Louis 14th, oh, thank you, excellent. Louis 14th, we see him wearing high heels, right? Anybody know when and how high heels were invented? They were invented for men, yeah?
I don't know the time period, but they were invented for men to show off their legs.
Even before it was invented for men to show off their legs, Persian horse riders, who were all men, wore them so that their feet wouldn't slip through the stirrups. Very practical. And actually, horse riders today, equestrians, always wear heeled boots. It's very important if you're riding a horse, right? So it then became a fashionable statement because indeed, it does make your calves look beautiful. So if you are a vain person and you are of royalty, which means that you don't have to labor in the fields and you don't need to tend after, all the manual construction that's going on in your beautiful palace, then you can walk around in these very impractical shoes. And it's a symbol of wealth, right? And in fact, breeches. I don't know if you can see that he's wearing breeches that cut off at the knee. That also shows off the beautiful calves. This is Franklin Delano Roosevelt. Okay, this is 1886, I believe. Or 1884, maybe. I think he was 6 years old in this picture, or 4 years old. I'm crossing them. But the point is that children during this era all wore white dresses up until the age of about 4, 5, 6. And they also all wore heels and had long hair. This was just a common everyday occurrence. Anybody know at what point that changed and boys wore blue and girls wore pink? Another reason thank you very much, and another reason that it switched is capitalism. So in department stores, they found that, this is a baby boom is happening during the war, and the stores could sell more clothes if they were gendered. So if you already had a boy, and now you're having a girl, you couldn't possibly reuse the same clothes because pink is for girls and blue is for boys. So it worked to earn them more money. Yeah, it changed during the 20th century. But my point is that it's constantly changing and shifting, and we see that. So we're seeing men wearing eyeliner and makeup. We are seeing men wearing skirts. And I want to point out, these are men of color. And we have Jaden Smith, delightfully. We have Vin Diesel, Kanye, right? We've got some rando guy on the street. So the point is that, people are playing with gender expression, and it will constantly shift. Any given time and place will represent a different expectation. These are ones here in America. But when we look across the world and across culture, we're seeing other types of expression. So gender expression does not tell us very much about who someone's gender actually is. So, let me go back a second. So when we talk about gender expression, that's one component. We talked about orientation. That's another component. We know that these are not binary categories. There's not just two. So when we talk about biology and we talk about sex, there also are not just two, right? So the term for that is intersex, and this particular flag is the intersex flag. There are other flags, although this is one that's becoming more popular. And for folks who are less familiar with it, the older and more offensive term is hermaphrodite, so we do not use that. The community uses intersex. Some people use disorders of sexual development, DSD, but that's a more medicalized term for those who connect with that. So this includes lots and lots of categories. We're talking about differences in hormones, variations. We're talking about variations in chromosomes. We're talking about variations in internal and external reproductive organs. So it can include a lot of things, and this is just a sampling of the things that might contribute to someone being intersex. Okay. Again, don't have time to talk a ton about it, so please go do some research. It is important to understand this is a community that's highly stigmatized. Normally, if I was doing this 101 with a group, I'd go into some of this, right? Take a picture. There you go. Okay. So it's important to understand that this is not a binary category either. Even though we've decided that sex is two, what ends up happening to intersex infants? Does anybody know? Yes?
In some cases, the parents make the choice as to which gender binary their child will be at birth, and then sometimes they don't know.
Absolutely. So for those who didn't hear, often the parents and the doctor get together and talk about what sex that child should be, decide for the child. The child may undergo non-consensual genital surgery that can leave that person with a lack of erotic sensation, with ongoing pain throughout their life in some cases, and it may actually affect their sexual function, where they would have been fine beforehand. But they are, essentially have genital mutilation. That's a lot of people talk about it that way. And this happens 45 children every day in the United States. Sometimes, for folks who are intersex, they realize later that the sex that they were assigned at birth, non-consensually, was wrong. Sometimes they identify with the sex that they were assigned at birth. So regardless of the assignment that they were given, it wasn't their choice. And that's the point. So about 1 in 150 people are intersex. That's a larger number than most people expect. And it's when we add the incidence of all of these. So each of these have different rates. Each of these kind of experiences and variations in bodies have different rates of occurrence. And when we start to add them all together, we actually come up with a much higher number than most people realize. There are many, many different numbers. I get this one from someone named Dr. Carey Gabriel. What's his last name? Costello. There we go. I'm having a blanking day today on my memory, clearly. So his work is actually fascinating. He's located in the Midwest. A great person to follow, and his blog is the Intersex Roadshow. So I encourage you to learn more there. So let's talk about how we come to gender identity, right? So how do we know what our gender actually is? I mean, some of you may be familiar with Lance Armstrong. So if a man loses a testicle or his penis is blown off in a war, if a woman has to have a mastectomy because she has breast cancer, does that make them any less of their gender? I'm seeing people nodding no. Does anybody feel like that does make someone no longer the gender that they are? It doesn't. Why not? Because our gender isn't our body. A lot of people, when I ask the question, how do you know your gender? People will say things like, well, I can bear children, or because I have a penis. And I ask them, if you didn't have those things, if you couldn't bear children, would that mean that you identify differently? Would you no longer be who you are? And it pauses people many times to really have to ask the question to themselves, what makes me me? For the trans community, that question is something we've already been asking. It's something we ask every day because we don't have the luxury and the privilege to exist in a world that says you are who you are based on these things that are completely unrelated. So the way I describe gender is that we're given this map, essentially these two boxes, right? We're given this map, and for some people, you get the map from the time you're born and you go, yep, I fit right on it. Perfect, great. Nothing feels out of whack. For others of us, we try to find ourselves on that map and it doesn't quite fit. So people might say, oh, well, okay, maybe I'm gay, maybe I'm lesbian, maybe I'm bi, maybe that's what's going on, right? Maybe I just don't express gender in the same way. Maybe I'm a tomboy. But in fact, for trans people, it's that the gender box doesn't actually fit at all. The one that you were given, assigned at birth, based on the genitals that a doctor or a parent saw when you were born. It doesn't fit. And so folks start looking for a different place, a different box for themselves. Not all of us actually fit into any of the boxes. So there are some trans folks, obviously, who are binary. There are folks who, are trans women, and they identify as women, and it's still a binary category, even though they were misassigned at birth. And there are people who are trans men. So we've got Laverne Cox, we've got Chaz Bono. These are public examples of folks who are binary gendered trans people. But there are plenty of us who don't fit into those binary boxes. And hopefully by now, right, we've been deconstructing these two boxes enough to understand that none of these categories are a binary. Not sex, not expression, not orientation, and certainly not gender either. And so the old model, this is the linear model, right? Where men are at one end, women are at the other, and somewhere in between, maybe there's some androgynous people, right? However, this model doesn't work, and it doesn't work for some very important reasons. Namely, the actual people who don't fit on the model are saying it doesn't work. One of those people is me, right? So I'm not in the middle. I'm not a part woman and part man. I don't exist on this line. So when I conceive of myself, I think to myself, well, none of these words, none of these ideas actually describe gender for me. So this model doesn't work. So with respect to the folks that I really want to acknowledge that there were a lot of people involved in creating a different model with me. Ultimately, in varying ways, intellectually, we came together through conversation, and people have developed other ideas. Some folks have seen, models that have like a little person figure and all like that and different scales. I still think those are problematic, and if you're interested in why, we can talk about it afterwards. The model I use instead, and hopefully everybody got a handout, and if you didn't, there are handouts in the back. I use the universe model of gender, and I do this based on the idea that, it's a three-dimensional space rather than a linear space. So I imagine that everybody's gender is a star in the universe, right? We're all special snowflakes. Everybody always wanted to be one, now you are. So everybody has a specific gender that's unique to you, and we cluster together into galaxies. So we do have a galaxy of women, and all of the people in that galaxy use that term women, but they're all very different in their womanhood. Some of those women are transgender women. Some of them are cisgender women, not trans. Some of those women are tomboys and are straight, and some of those women are femmes and are queer, and some of those women wear lipstick, and some of those women never will, right? Some of them are CEOs, some of them are mothers, some of them are both. All of them are women, regardless of the expression, regardless of their orientation, regardless of their bodies. Some of those women are intersex, and all of them identify as women. And then we have another galaxy of stars, and all of those are men. And again, some of them are trans men, some of them are cis men, some of them are queer and bi and straight. Some of them are femme presenting, some of them are not. Some of them like watching football on TV, and others really could never care. So all of them are men, and it does not matter because that has nothing to do with their gender. Well, if we look around, there's quite a few more stars in the universe, and we haven't necessarily named them or recognized them, but they exist. And so in reality, there's now words for folks, and these are just a few of them, just a few. And if you look on Facebook now, you can select many other words. You can write in your own. If you look on Tumblr, which I highly encourage people to do, folks are coming up with dozens of words every day to describe their gender. And it's a beautiful thing because language allows people to talk about their existence. They existed before, but the words allow folks to connect and see themselves in others. So we have folks who are genderqueer and non-binary. We have folks who are bigender and androgyne, and we have new toi folks. There's someone who writes a blog up in San Francisco about this. We have stud, we have trigender, glitterbutch, that's a word I use for myself, gender fluid, pangender, I mean, all the words you can think of. But we have also folks who have no gender at all. They're agender or genderless. There's many other words. And so I point this out because if we don't recognize all of these genders in the work that we do, we're really missing the conversation. If we continue to talk about binary gender in all of our sexual assault work, what happens to the people here who are being sexually assaulted at 39.1% of the cases in college? 39.1% of these people are going to be sexually assaulted. And we're not talking about them. We're not recognizing them, we're not speaking to them in our prevention work, and we're not incorporating them necessarily either in our intervention. And we need to be. So let's talk briefly about social norms, right? Lemmings, right? We all jump off the cliff together. So social norms really guide how we conceive of the world that we're in and the rules that we follow. Many of us incorporate social norms in our prevention work. So if you do, clap your hands over your head. If you talk about social norms, give us a clap. Okay, great. How many of you are talking about social norms that are disrupting the binary? Clap your hand over your head. Okay, I'm really excited about that. And so I hope that as we talk about this, you're going to share a little bit about those. A couple of examples, and I just wanted to give you some of the ways that binary social norms or messages might contribute to myths around sexual violence. So the idea that women are naturally passive and gentle people, right? Ultimately, that's going to lead to the idea that lesbians don't rape, obviously, right? Because they're women and they can't because they're so gentle, and it's not true. Men always want sex. One of the ways that appears in the gay community is the idea that, as a result, gay men cannot be raped. It cannot happen. I've heard this from gay men. The idea that men are perpetrators, that ultimately the social norm, this idea that we have carried in this movement for 40 years, that men are perpetrators. What happens when we have trans women who aren't seen as actual women, right? Since trans women are not viewed as real women, ultimately, then they are perpetrators. And we hear that in the conversation around bathroom bills. We hear that when people say, well, I'm scared of having my children in a bathroom with a trans woman. And they're never talking about trans men, they're always talking about trans women, right? Because they think that trans women are men and that men are perpetrators. If we function under the idea that there's only two genders, well then non-binary people don't exist, obviously. But as a result, then they must, if they do exist, gosh, well they must be confused. And they can be turned into real men and women. They just haven't decided. And this is some of the same language that's used in the bisexual, like against bisexual people. And this is actually the root of corrective rape, right? So non-binary people are experiencing corrective rape as well. So we use the term culturally humble rather than culturally competent. The idea is we can never be fully competent in the work that we do that's not our own experience. So we can only approach it with humility and with the expectation that we're going to learn, and we commit to learning. So some strategies, and just very briefly, I'm going to touch on these. Neutral and aware language. So what are some of the words and terms that we can be using in the work that we do that is more neutral? And I'd love to hear from you. Nice and loud. They, them, theirs as pronouns. Thank you. What else? Partner instead of, boyfriend, girlfriend. Good. Folks, so using terms like folks, people, everyone, instead of boys and girls, ladies and gentlemen, my brothers and sisters. We can say things like, my family, my siblings, y'all, for the Southerners in the house, right? Absolutely. Was that a hand in the back? No? Okay. So these are terms. This is language that's neutral and mindful. It's also not a problem for anyone else listening to it, right? This isn't something that's going to disrupt everybody's understanding of what's going on. We're not introducing ideas that are new. We are simply neutralizing what we're doing. So when I hear presenters constantly saying he and she, and constantly, talking about, my brothers and my sisters, I think to myself, I'm being excluded from the conversation. You aren't actually talking to me about me. You don't even know that I exist. And that's the experience for many non-binary people. So checking assumptions. What are some of the assumptions that we make in this field? Maybe you aren't making them, but what are some assumptions people are making? Yeah. There's many ways to talk about this, and it might be different depending on the audience that you're with. I don't always talk about gender identity as a separate thing. So if my focus is about, sexual assault prevention, I may not do a whole thing about gender identity, right? That may not be appropriate, there may not be time for it, it may not be relevant, but we can weave the lessons in to the work we're doing. And so, so if I'm talking about gender identities, I won't necessarily separate transgender, binary trans people from cisgender men and women, right? Because a trans woman is a woman. Saying she's trans is sort of irrelevant in many cases. It matters. It matters when we start talking about how trans women are being impacted differently. When we talk about how Black trans women are impacted differently. When we talk about how Asian trans, So I use those terms when it's appropriate. But I will say things like people who are men, people who are women, people who are neither men nor women, people who are a different gender, people who are no gender at all. Stuff like that. I don't know if that's answering your question. Okay. Absolutely. And we see it, within the queer communities, the queer and trans communities, as well as from outside. So it's important that we recognize that. Trans people can also be abusers. I've seen it, right? So it's important that we're thinking about all the intersections, because if we really step back and understand that this is about power and control, and it's not about gender, and we're thinking about the term gender-based violence and what that means. I actually struggle with this, and I was wondering if I should talk about it and if I even had time to really talk about it, but I'll touch on it very briefly. I'm not a fan of the idea of violence against women. I think it's an important thing to be talking about. I think women are targeted, and we need to have a conversation about that. But I don't think that the overall term of violence against women is super useful. And I was talking with one of the other presenters the other night. We were up really late having a conversation, and they like the term gender-based violence, and we were talking about the pros and cons of even that, because this is power-based violence. And then I started thinking, all of violence is power-based. And I was like, what makes this different? So, these are things for us to grapple with. I think it's a useful conversation. Can't have it right now. But again, gender is implicated. If we look back, the fact that 39% of trans students versus 33% of women in college, there's something going on there. And we need to understand that. We need to understand what it is about gender that's happening. In the same way that we need to understand what it is about race that's happening and what it is about all these other categories, because these matter. They are affecting the dynamic. So if we're not thinking about it in a constructive way, then we're ignoring it, Right? I just want to kind of get into some of the other things here. So we need to be checking our assumptions in the way that we're approaching it. Looking at our outreach efforts. Who, when, how are we reaching out? What are we doing to engage communities? If we're not part of the community, what does it look like to get connected? Right? And so that might be teaming up with a local, LGBTIQ community organization. It might be doing some events where you partner with them that's not about your issue. Right? Working in solidarity with the community first to develop the relationship, and then looking at those relationships as the beginning for the conversation around sexual assault. Your printed materials, who's on them? Are they being portrayed in the same way that other people are being portrayed? So my boss actually was at a meeting in California where folks were displaying some printed materials, and for every community, there was specific materials for Black folks, and specific materials for Latinx, and specific materials for all these different communities. And then when it came to the transgender community, everybody else had photos of real people, and in the trans community, it was a cartoon. What does that mean? Right? How does that feel if you're a trans person seeing all these materials displayed? So when we think about our materials, right, it's the language we're using in it. So a lot of agencies say we serve men, women, and children. Okay, what about non-binary folks? Children encompasses it if you're young, but if you're an adult, where are you in that? Right? So you can instead say we serve people of all genders. Now, for the vast majority of folks, that's going to go right over their head. It's fine. If you're cisgender, you say people of all genders, great, okay. For trans folks, non-binary folks, that means a lot. The significance, the impact is very, very different depending on who you are reading that material. So a lot of what I say is we serve people of all genders, all orientations, regardless of immigration status, regardless of race, right? So I will go into it. And that's a way of communicating to people in the room, in the work that I'm doing, that we're accessible, right? The images in your environment, so your office, what are you doing? What are you displaying that says, I'm open, I'm understanding, I am aware, right? Are there ways that, are the posters that you have very binary? Are the posters that you have talking about men perpetrating against women? These are campaign posters that have existed for many years. Do we still have them up in our offices? And then finally, and this is where we're going to dig in a little bit today, is the prevention curriculum itself. So, some people are thinking about retroactively adapting presentations, and I encourage you to really think about it from the ground up. So one of the conversations we have at CCS is when we are thinking about a curriculum for a particular community, we actually do the research all over again that's based on that community. So for example, when we're doing work for the Latinx community, we did a series of parent workshops for folks in a particular school where it's a trauma-informed school. For those who don't know, Cherokee Point Elementary, it's awesome in San Diego. So trauma-informed schools are a really critical component of doing this work. But we're doing a parent workshop there, and so it was in Spanish, the workshop's in Spanish. All the research that we did for the workshop was done with Spanish sources, Spanish language sources, right? So it's important because it frames the conversation quite differently. The language you're using, the information coming out of the community, and the way in which you conceptualize how you're talking about the material is going to be different as a result. So starting from the ground up can really shift the entire curriculum. And I encourage you to think about the ways in which are we just kind of slapping stuff onto an existing curriculum, or are we really thinking about from the beginning reinventing what we're talking about? Does it apply to everybody? Or does it only keep applying to the same people, but we're using different language in it? It's a challenging thing to do. It takes work. It takes money. I know that. It takes time. And so it does require us to be thoughtful about it and to take steps, right? So you may begin with adapting your material, and then as you go, maybe some activities you build in that are completely reinvented until finally you redevelop your curriculum. So I love this image, if we center trans folks in the work And I don't mean center in the sense of making everything about trans people. I mean reconceptualizing things to include people of all genders from the beginning, right? And we remember the strength and resilience that individuals have in these communities. We can really look at our services and our prevention in different ways. So let's quickly take a look at a piece of curriculum. And this is an activity that we do in our curriculum, and I want your participation in this. So what we're looking for is binary gendered language. We're looking for heterosexism, which is the assumption that people are straight. We're looking for cissexism, which is the assumption and the dominance of people who are not trans, who are cisgender. And binarism, the binary of gender. So we're looking at the prioritizing of people who are binary over those who are not. So keep these things in mind as we talk about this piece of curriculum so that we can then pick it apart just a little bit. So this is a piece of CCS curriculum. Let's see if it'll scroll when I do this. Ooh, look at that. Okay. So, this may look different from some of yours, but this is one component, one module that we do out of a 4-module series. And this one is about the media and social norms. So when we're talking about, consent, that's great, but let's also talk about the ways in which, the media is impacting us, right? So we do a media bubble, and then we also do, this is really odd, huh? There we go. So we do gender boxes. Does anybody else do gender boxes? Clap your hands over your head. Okay, awesome. So some people are definitely doing it. So, gender boxes is what we're going to go through today, but we also talk about Disney myths, so we do all kinds of stuff. This is a high school curriculum. We ruined Disney for those kids, and I don't feel bad about it. We talk about dominant stories, right, and we have some videos and stuff in the curriculum. So let's talk a little bit about gender boxes. So it's very similar, right, at some level. The way we do it is that we draw 2 boxes. Say men and women. And then this is the interactive part, right? So we're talking about what are the qualities and things that we think of when we think of men. Give me a few words. Strong. What? Lazy. Okay. Likes women. What else? A couple other things. What are men supposed to be? Dominant.
Providers. Make money.
Providers. Make money. Right? Absolutely. And what about women? What do we think women should be? What are nurturing. Passive. Freaky. But not too freaky. Okay? And so we'll go through this with the students a little bit. And then we ask the students to tell us, what do we call men who don't fit in this box, who don't do these things, who aren't this way? What are some of the words? And let's be real here about the words that kids are using for this.
Gay, sissy, pussy.
So gay and sissy and pussy. What else? Punk. Fag, thank you.
Little bitch.
Bitch. Okay, and what are some of the words that we are using to call women who don't fit in this box, who don't do these things?
Tomboy.
Dyke, rude, or tomboy, bitch. What was that? Hoe, cunt. Okay, we can go on, right? Now, what are some of the things that we do to men who we call these names to? And what are some of the things that men do to themselves when they are called these things?
Fight.
So fight. What else? Suicide. Yes. Drugs. Alcohol.
Front.
Say it again. Front.
Mm-hmm. Rape.
Rape. Okay. And what do women do when they are called these things, either to themselves or what do we do to women? Say it again. Cut. Eat. Eating disorders. Uh-huh. Fight.
Suicide.
Absolutely.
Alcohol.
Okay, and so we're seeing how this goes on. Now, let's pause for a minute and go back and talk about what just happened if we use it in this form without change. So what are some of the things that you noticed happening during this exercise? And so ultimately what we're talking about here is questioning in the activity, during the activity with the students, questioning these boxes to begin with, right? And in part, historically, the way this has been used is to question the way the box applies to men and women, right? So that if you don't fit in the box perfectly, you're still a man and you're still a woman, that's the assumption, right? But if you don't fit into the box perfectly, then violence is inflicted on you or you inflict it on yourself, right? However, the way we can adapt this and the way that we can deepen it is exactly what you're saying and what everybody else is kind of picking up on exactly is that we can actually challenge the ideas of gender from the very beginning. And we can be asking questions about, does everybody fit into one of these boxes anyway? Do we fit perfectly? Does any one of us fit perfectly into one of these boxes? Do we actually live out every quality that belongs in these boxes? And what does that mean for us? So it allows us to challenge gender as an entire construct, just the way we've named it. We can bring race into this. We can be talking about the ways in which black men in this country uphold or don't this idea of masculinity. We can be talking about the way that Asian women are assumed to be more submissive, right? There are ways that we can really deepen this conversation with our students on so many levels. And so one of those is absolutely around this idea of a binary gender. Right? And so our educators still use this, and they change it by doing many of the things that exactly you just said, right? So we're asking the question then, and what if you didn't fit into one of the boxes to begin with because your gender is not man and not woman? And sometimes the students go, huh? Right? And that's okay, because we just say it matter-of-factly, because we know it exists and we know that there's a high likelihood that there is a student in that room for whom that is true. So we are talking to them as well, and we're making it safer for them. So what I would like for you to do, just for the next 5 minutes, because we have about 10 remaining, I think. Is that right? Excellent. So I would like you to just circle up with a few people. Try to find a group of maybe 4 or 5, somewhere close to you. You can move around. And I'd love for you to discuss some component of curriculum that you use or that you'd like to be using. And think about the ways in which it's working or not working with regard to gender that's more expansive. What are some of the things that you can do differently? What are some of the ways that you are doing things differently? So I really want this to be a knowledge sharing moment where you can be applying new ideas or ideas that others are already using, okay? So I'll circulate around, I'll answer questions, but please share with each other as well. Thank you. And so for those who couldn't hear that, the challenge being when we have men and boys programs or girls empowerment programs or any number of gender divided programs, how do we actually navigate that? Are those still valuable? And I think that those are, again, are important questions to ask. I think we're struggling with it at our agency. Yes, there needs to be space for girls that's separate. Why? Because girls get shut down all the time. And how do we recognize that also trans people are getting shut down and invisible? And how do we recognize that boys need spaces to challenge what's going on for them that feels like a space they can actually engage in? So it may mean creating some all-gendered spaces where people are learning together. It may mean that we're creating some separate spaces and allowing people to self-select into them. It may mean that we're really thoughtful in the materials when we talk about what that space is and why we made it. there are many options here. And again, I don't have all the answers. I think we need to look at our communities locally. I think we need to be thinking about how it impacts the actual people that we're working with, and be asking them what they want and need. So some of the students, if you have non-binary students in the schools, right, be talking to them and saying, if you were to see this, what would it mean to you? How would you feel? You know, what are the ways that we can create spaces that work? Youth are amazing. They will tell you exactly what's up, and they have great ideas. So following their lead is almost always going to get you where you need to go. Any other final thoughts? The same question came up in the back group about intake forms, demographics. That is, I could do an entire 3-hour presentation on that. So I cannot answer that question because we're out of time. However, if folks are interested in that, my information. So first of all, there's some great resources out there. And my information is here. Please take my card. Let's have those conversations. There are some absolutely great ways to capture data and demographics that are much more inclusive. Thank you all so, so much. Enjoy your flight back to wherever you're from. Enjoy your time in DC if you still have it. Thank you.
Thank you for listening to this Prevent Connect podcast. Prevent Connect is a project of the California Coalition Against Sexual Assault, with funding from the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention. The views presented on Prevent Connect are not necessarily the views of the United States government, the CDC, or CalCASA. To learn more about Prevent Connect, visit www.preventconnect.org. For more information about CalCASA's mission, or to show your support, visit calcasa.org. That's CALCASA.org.